Joe Malone's sole life ambition was the peaceful management of his dilapidated bar on the colony's outskirts, far removed from any trouble. Unfortunately for Joe, trouble had just walked in, disguised as a 10-foot-tall alien clad in gleaming armor. This imposing figure had 6 arms and a face that suggested a recent, unsuccessful encounter with a wood chipper. "Who among you is worthy?" the creature bellowed, its voice resonating through the dusty colony square. The colonists, previously occupied with their daily routines, tending crops, repairing hovercarts, froze in their tracks. An alien invasion wasn't exactly on their Tuesday to-do list, and they were certainly unprepared for a philosophical debate with this thing star. As one, they looked towards Joe's bar, the Rusty Meteor, a beacon of hope in their quiet lives, praying Joe might have a solution. Joe, however, was completely clueless. In fact, at the first extraterrestrial shout, he'd taken cover behind the bar. But under the weight of the townsfolk's expectant gazes, he reluctantly emerged, sighing, "Of course, it's always me." The alien warlord's multiple eyes narrowed, focusing on Joe as he cautiously emerged from the Rusty Meteor's doorway. "You there?" the warlord boomed. "Are you this pathetic world's champion?" Joe blinked, instinctively looking around for anyone else, absolutely anyone, to take the mantle. With a resigned sigh, he stepped fully into the dusty street. "Well, I own the bar, if that's what you're asking." The alien's 6 eyes blinked in unison, clearly not impressed. He consulted the small, trembling creature at his side, which mumbled a hasty translation. The warlord's face brightened with feigned excitement, as if he had stumbled upon some great prize. "Then you shall be my opponent in the grand duel of honor," he proclaimed, raising all 6 of his arms in a gesture that suggested he was accustomed to much more enthusiastic applause. The colonists exchanged uneasy glances. "Look," Joe began, squinting up at the towering alien, "what's this all about, exactly?" The alien huffed, the force of it stirring up the dust around his feet. "I am Zorag. Conqueror of worlds, crusher of empires, pulverizer of, well, you get the picture. I have vanquished the champions of 12-star systems, and today I challenge your strongest warrior to honorable combat. Surely, there is one among you worthy of facing me." The assembled townsfolk, as one, turned back to Joe. He raised his hands defensively. "Whoa, hold on. I'm not a warrior. I'm just Joe Malone. I pour drinks, I don't do this sort of thing anymore." At this, Zorag let out a laugh that sounded like a rockslide in space. "Typical human cowardice. Perhaps your planet isn't as brave as the legends say." He gestured to his crew, a group of burly, beetle-like aliens who snickered and pointed their antennae at the colonists. "Well, that's it," exclaimed Mabel, a retired miner with a fiery spirit and a flair for the dramatic. "Joe, you're not going to let this 6-armed space bully call us cowards, are you?" Joe groaned, looking at the ground as if a solution might magically materialize. "Look, I haven't been in a fight in 20 years, Mabel. This isn't exactly a fair fight." Mabel simply arched an eyebrow, giving him a look that dared him to disagree. "Maybe he's scared," she announced, loud enough for everyone, including Zorag, to hear. "I bet Joe doesn't have what it takes anymore." "Oh, for the love of..." Joe rolled his eyes. There were few things more irritating than being goaded by his own neighbors. "So, the great champion is afraid?" Zorag sneered, crossing all 6 arms in a dramatic pout. "Pity. I expected more from humanity. Very well, I shall conquer this world without a single challenge." All right. Joe yelled, cutting him off. "Fine, I'll fight. Just give me a minute." The townspeople murmured their approval, though a few still looked dubious. After all, Joe was past his prime. Quite a bit past it, in fact. But it was either Joe or letting this warlord rampage through their colony unopposed. And if there was one thing everyone agreed on, it was that letting a 6-armed alien named Zorag call them cowards was simply not an option. Joe stepped back inside the Rusty Meteor, leaning against the worn counter as he mentally prepared for what he suspected was a colossal blunder. His old boxing gloves, relics of a bygone era, hung framed on the wall, gathering dust. He hadn't so much as looked at them since the day he'd opened the bar. With a heavy sigh, Joe reached for the gloves, pulling them down and slipping his hands inside. Their familiar weight brought a strange mix of nostalgia and apprehension. "Okay, Joe," he muttered to himself, "just try not to get killed out there." He re-emerged, fists raised in a semblance of a fighting stance, as the townsfolk formed a wide circle around him. Zorag, towering above, unleashed his chilling, gravelly laugh, making Joe question every life choice that led to this moment. "Is this the best your planet can offer?" Zorag boomed, looking down at Joe with a smirk. "I expected a bit more muscle." Joe chuckled. "Well, Zorag," he said, "maybe it's not the size of the muscles, but how you use them." He wasn't entirely sure if that was accurate, but it sounded confident enough, and it earned him a few chuckles from the crowd. Zorag seemed momentarily thrown by Joe's unexpected confidence. "Prepare yourself, Earthling," he roared, raising all 6 arms in what appeared to be a ridiculously complex boxing stance. Joe barely managed to suppress a laugh. "Oh, I'm ready," he replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Let's just get this over with." The stage was set, on one side, a towering alien warlord capable of crushing mountains, on the other, Joe Malone, a retired boxer with creaky joints and a bravado that outweighed his physical capabilities. The townsfolk held their collective breath, their gazes shifting between Joe and Zorag, a mixture of hope and dread in their eyes. Joe adjusted his gloves one last time, bracing himself. The bizarre match was about to begin. Joe hadn't been in a real boxing match in 2 decades. Now, facing a 10-foot alien warlord with 6 arms and biceps seemingly capable of bench-pressing a starship, he started to recall exactly why he'd retired. Shaking his head, Joe retreated to the bar. "Well, Joe," he muttered to himself, "you just agreed to fight an alien powerhouse in front of the entire colony. Genius move, pal." He patted himself on the back, then sighed, acutely aware that he was in over his head. Inside, a few regulars, including Randy, the colony mechanic and Joe's most devoted patron, were captivated by the unfolding absurdity. Randy, leaning back with a broad grin, quipped, "Didn't know you still had it in you, old man." Joe glared at him. "Oh, I don't have it in me, Randy. But if I chicken out now, they'll never let me live it down." Mabel chimed in, tossing him a water bottle. "Come on, Joe, where's that fighting spirit? Remember when you'd knock them flat before they could blink? This is just like that, only, 6 times bigger and slightly slimier." "It's not the size or the slime," Joe retorted, pulling on his gloves and checking his reflection in the dusty mirror. "It's the fact that this guy has an entourage of goons outside just waiting for an excuse to flatten us all. And yet, here we are." He wrapped his hands with some worn bandages and took a few practice swings. The gloves felt strange, heavy, unfamiliar, yet also comforting, a tangible link to his past. Looking at his reflection, a 52-year-old man with more grey hairs than muscle, he couldn't help but laugh. "All right, champ," he murmured, "what's the worst that could happen?" "Death by honorable defeat." Zorag's voice boomed from outside, as if answering Joe's question. Joe rolled his eyes. "Can't a guy have a private moment?" Randy clapped him on the shoulder. "We believe in you, Joe. You got this." He pulled a tattered headband from his pocket and placed it on Joe's head, apparently mistaking him for some sort of intergalactic Rocky Balboa. "Just pretend he's a big punching bag." "Sure," Joe snorted, eyeing the door longingly. "Except this punching bag fights back with 6 fists." Outside in the colony square, the townsfolk were assembling a makeshift ring from shipping crates and overturned hovercarts. Zorag and his minions stood off to the side, unimpressed with the humans' efforts. The warlord was delivering a grandiose, snarling monologue in his native tongue, gesticulating widely with all 6 arms as he recounted his epic victories and the countless warriors he'd vanquished. The colonists weren't exactly optimistic about Joe's chances, but the sheer ludicrousness of the situation kept them intrigued. When Joe emerged, they cheered and whistled as if he were their last hope, which, in a way, he was. Or at least their last chance to avoid a full-blown alien invasion. "Behold," Zorag announced, pointing one of his many fingers at Joe as he entered the makeshift arena. I have faced champions of mighty planets, warriors who could topple mountains with a single blow. And this is what Earth sends to face me? Joe shrugged, playing along with a lopsided grin. Yeah, well, maybe I'm all we need, Zorag. Ever think of that? Zorag sneered, revealing his fangs. Prepare yourself, weakling, for I shall crush you with a single swipe. Sure thing, big guy, Joe replied, giving him a thumbs up as if he hadn't heard the threat. Behind him, the colonists snickered, and even a couple of Zorag soldiers twitched their antennae in amusement. Joe called out to Mabel, who was holding up a Go Joe sign fashioned from an old cardboard box. You got this, champ. Just remember what Coach used to say. Which part, Mabel? Joe shouted back, grinning. The part about blocking punches, or the part about ducking for cover? Both, she laughed. With a sigh, Joe took a deep breath, settled into his best approximation of a fighting stance, and tried to ignore the slight tremor in his legs. Zorag stepped forward, cracking all 12 of his knuckles with an ominous, alien-sounding rhythm that seemed to echo across the colony. Now, we fight! Zorag roared, raising his 6 fists in a stance that looked more suited to a dance competition than a brawl. Joe stifled a laugh, trying to remain focused. Hey, Zori, Joe said, adopting his most serious fighter face. Just a little heads up, on Earth, we start with a jab, not a speech. Zorag narrowed his eyes, clearly not one to appreciate pre-fight banter. You mock the Crusher of Worlds? Crusher of asterisk what asterisk? Joe quipped, taking a cautious step forward. You asked for it, big guy. And then, as if to underscore the absurdity of the entire situation, he threw the weakest, most half-hearted jab imaginable, aimed at nothing in particular. It wasn't even a punch, it was more like a poke. The crowd held its breath, waiting for Zorag's reaction. For a moment, the alien warlord appeared utterly bewildered. His 6 eyes blinked in unison, staring at Joe's fist as if it were a curious toy. Then, the laughter began, a raucous, gravelly laugh that shook the ground. Humans, he chortled, hands on his sides. Is this truly the extent of your strength? Joe, completely unfazed, shrugged and threw another soft jab, this one landing even more awkwardly than the last. Well, what can I say? We like to keep things interesting. The colonists erupted in laughter, and even a few of Zorag's soldiers, clearly accustomed to more violent duels, couldn't help but crack a smile. Zorag, however, was not amused. He bared his fangs again, flexing his 6 arms in a comically exaggerated display. Enough of these games, Earthling. Prepare to be crushed. Joe gulped, but forced a smile. Yeah. Just don't hit too hard, all right? With Joe's impending showdown with Zorag looming, the colony launched into a flurry of activity that could best be described as enthusiastically inept. A training regimen was hastily assembled, more resembling a group of retirees attempting aerobics than a serious preparation for intergalactic combat. Mabel, perched atop a crate and brandishing a tattered towel like a coach from a bygone era, yelled encouragement, "Come on, Joe, give it your all. Show us those killer moves." Joe, rolling his eyes, obliged with a few lackluster punches aimed at an empty crate serving as a makeshift punching bag. He was acutely aware of his less-than-stellar physical condition, his wheezing after a single jab doing little to inspire confidence. Randy, sprawled comfortably on another crate, offered his expert commentary, "That's it, champ. Put some oomph into it." "Randy," Joe retorted, pausing to catch his breath, "I've got maybe 2 functioning muscles left. I'll put some oomph into it if you volunteer to be the punching bag." Randy, however, simply cackled, raising a bottle of the colony's homemade spirits in a mock toast. "Nah, old man, I'm coaching from the sidelines today." Meanwhile, the colony's younger generation busied themselves crafting signs with slogans like "Go Joe" and "The Human Fist." Hardly intimidating, but heartfelt nonetheless. The colonists, clearly relishing the spectacle, treated the entire affair as the most exciting event since the annual hovercart race. Inside the rusty meteor, Joe slumped onto a stool, shaking his head at the sheer absurdity of it all. He leaned towards Randy, muttering, "You do realize I'm going to be flattened tomorrow, right?" "Relax," Randy replied, taking a swig from his bottle. "That big lug doesn't know what he's in for." "Nobody does." He winked conspiratorially, as if that settled everything. Joe simply sighed. "That's comforting, because I don't even know what I'm in for." Outside, Zorag soldiers observed the humans' preparations with a mixture of bewilderment and amusement. Encamped at the colony's edge, they kept a watchful eye on their leader's challenger, occasionally exchanging confused murmurs in their alien tongue. The humans' pathetic display of training was clearly beyond their comprehension. One of the soldiers, a beetle-like creature named Reza, approached Zorag. "Great warlord," he intoned, his voice deep and respectful, "are you certain this is a wise course of action?" The human appears ill-equipped. Zorag scoffed, crossing all 6 arms. "It is not a matter of wisdom, Reza. It is tradition." He glanced at Joe, who was struggling to lift a half-empty barrel. "Besides," he sneered, "this will be the easiest victory of my illustrious career. This so-called champion can barely lift his own arms." Back at the makeshift training grounds, Joe decided he'd had enough conditioning. If he was going to face Zorag, he'd do it his way, with a healthy dose of sarcasm and a few rusty boxing moves. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he went through the motions of his old training routine, shuffling his feet, throwing half-speed jabs, and muttering boxing mantras under his breath. "Keep your left up, don't forget the jab, don't get pulverized by an alien warlord." It wasn't much, but it was all he had. As evening fell, the colonists gathered to wish him luck, offering words of encouragement and pats on the back. Mabel presented him with a cracked helmet retrieved from the storage room, proclaiming it a good luck charm, though Joe remained skeptical. Randy shoved a water bottle into his hand. "Hydrate or die, champ," he advised. Joe eyed the bottle suspiciously. "This isn't from your private stash, is it?" "Only the best for you, Joe," Randy replied with a grin. Joe rolled his eyes, but took a swig, coughing as the potent homemade liquid burned its way down. Mabel, acting as Joe's self-appointed manager, pulled him aside. "Look, Joe," she said, gripping his shoulders, "I know this isn't what you signed up for, but you gotta give that alien a show he'll never forget. Show him what humans are made of." Joe shrugged, smirking. "Mostly bad decisions, Mabel." She laughed, giving him a friendly slap on the back. "Just do your best, champ. If you go down swinging." On his way back to his quarters, Joe passed Zorag's camp, where the warlord was being meticulously polished by his crew. He had to admit, the sight was intimidating: gleaming armor, 6 flexing arms, and an entourage whispering praises. "Tomorrow, the galaxy will witness your strength once more, great Zorag," one of the attendants murmured. Zorag, noticing Joe observing from the shadows, grinned. "Say goodbye to your world, human. Tomorrow, you face a force that has toppled empires." Joe raised his hands in mock terror. "Oh no, big guy, don't say things like that. I might actually get scared." Zorag blinked, unsure how to respond. This human, this supposed champion, was unlike any warrior he'd encountered. Instead of fear, Joe seemed almost amused. "Laugh while you can, Earthling," Zorag bellowed, deciding to play along. "Tomorrow, you will be nothing but a whisper on the winds of defeat." Joe gave him a casual salute. "Good night to you too, Zori. Get some rest. I don't want any excuses when I knock you out." He strolled back to the bar, his nonchalant demeanor leaving Zorag's crew utterly perplexed. The warlord himself watched Joe's retreating figure, a frown creasing his face. He was starting to feel uneasy. No one had ever spoken to him like that, much less laughed in his face. As Joe entered his room, he muttered to himself, "All right, Joe, you've got a 1 in a million shot at surviving this. But if you're going down, might as well go down in style." He closed his eyes, picturing the day's ludicrous training and the even more ludicrous spectacle to come. Whatever happened, he figured he'd at least give everyone a story to tell. And maybe, just maybe, he'd surprise a few people along the way, including himself. With that thought, Joe drifted off to sleep, a retired boxer preparing for the most improbable fight of his life against a six-armed alien warlord. Whether he'd survive or not was anyone's guess, but one thing was certain: Zorag was in for a show he'd never forget. With Joe's improbable victory against Zorag still echoing across the colony, the townsfolk erupted in a cacophony of cheers, hoisting their unlikely champion onto their shoulders. Mabel, practically bouncing with excitement, waved her makeshift "Go Joe" sign, while Randy slapped Joe on the back, a wide grin splitting his face. "You did it, old man. You actually knocked him flat." Joe, still slightly dazed and covered in dust, looked down at his worn gloves in disbelief. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, the reality of what he'd just done slowly sinking in. He hadn't just survived a duel with a six-armed alien warlord, he'd actually won. And in the most ridiculous, unbelievable way imaginable. The alien soldiers, their antennae twitching in bewildered shock, gathered around their fallen leader, muttering amongst themselves in hushed tones. Zorag lay sprawled on the ground, unconscious, a testament to the power of Joe's surprisingly effective punch. Reza, stepping forward with a respectful bow, addressed Joe. You have bested our warlord in honorable combat. We are at your mercy." Joe, still trying to catch his breath, blinked at the beetle-like alien. "Mercy? Nah, no mercy needed. Just maybe take a vacation somewhere other than Telia. It's not exactly a tourist hotspot." The soldiers, visibly relieved, nodded and began the arduous task of lifting their unconscious leader, muttering about the incredible strength of Earth's champion as they retreated. As the aliens departed, the colonists' cheers grew louder, their disbelief giving way to unadulterated joy. Joe, perched precariously on their shoulders, felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him, mixed with a strange sense of pride. He'd done it. He'd saved the colony, not with some grand display of strength, but with a well-placed punch and a healthy dose of luck. Mabel, catching his eye, grinned. "So, Joe," she shouted over the din, "think this makes up for missing out on those glory days?" Joe chuckled, shaking his head as he surveyed the celebrating crowd. "Mabel," he replied, "I think this just gave everyone a story they'll be telling for generations. I'd say that's worth a few grey hairs." In the days following the duel, life in the colony should have returned to normal. But Joe's unexpected victory over Zorag had inadvertently transformed their quiet corner of the galaxy into a hub of intergalactic gossip. News of the retired boxer who'd single-handedly defeated the galaxy's most feared warrior spread like wildfire, turning Joe Malone into an overnight legend. At first, Joe enjoyed the attention. The colonists, eager to celebrate their newfound hero, pitched in to renovate the rusty meteor, giving the dilapidated bar a much-needed makeover. Mabel, ever the entrepreneur, launched a hero's discount promotion, while Randy proudly hung a sign proclaiming the bar as the home of the champion who KO'd Zorag. It wasn't a title Joe was particularly comfortable with, but it certainly drew in the crowds. Then, the aliens started arriving. It began with a lone shuttle landing just outside the colony. From it emerged a tall, blue-skinned alien with 3 eyes and an expression of profound reverence. He strode into the rusty meteor, approached Joe, and bowed deeply. "Oh, no," Joe muttered under his breath, sensing what was coming. The alien straightened, his voice ringing with the solemnity of a royal decree. "I am Drenkal of the Zion Order. Word of your triumph has reached even the farthest corners of our system. I have journeyed here to witness the might of the human who vanquished Zorag." Joe cleared his throat, a nervous chuckle escaping his lips. Look, I think there might be a slight misunderstanding. It wasn't really that big a deal." "Please," Drenkal interrupted, his 3 eyes wide with admiration, "teach me your ways." Joe blinked, glancing around the bar as if hoping someone would intervene. "Teach you what, exactly?" "The power of the Earth Punch," Drenkal declared, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "My people, we need this strength. Train me to fight like you." Joe opened his mouth to explain that there was no such thing as an Earth Punch, that it had all been a fluke, a lucky shot. But the patrons of the Rusty Meteor were watching with amused smiles, and Mabel was already pouring Drenkel a drink. "Let him have his moment, Joe," she whispered with a wink. "You're a hero now. Might as well enjoy it." Joe's unlikely triumph over Zorag quickly transformed the sleepy colony of Telia into a hub of intergalactic whispers. The tale of a retired barkeep who'd floored the galaxy's most notorious warmonger spread like wildfire, elevating Joe Malone to legendary status practically overnight. Initially, Joe basked in the newfound admiration. The grateful colonists, eager to celebrate their unexpected savior, rallied together to give the Rusty Meteor a much-needed renovation. Mabel, ever the opportunistic spirit, immediately implemented a champion's discount on all beverages, while Randy proudly displayed a hand-painted sign declaring the bar the official home of the Zorag Knocker-Outer. The title wasn't exactly to Joe's taste, but it undeniably packed the bar. Then, the extraterrestrial visitors began to trickle in. It started with a solitary shuttle touching down just outside the colony. A tall, blue-skinned being with 3 eyes and an air of profound reverence emerged. He entered the Rusty Meteor, approached Joe with a determined stride, and performed a deep, respectful bow. "Oh, here we go," Joe mumbled, anticipating the inevitable. The alien rose, his voice resonating with a formal tone. "I am Drenkel of the Zion Order. Tales of your incredible feat have reached even the most distant star systems. I have undertaken this journey to witness firsthand the power of the human who bested Zorag." Joe coughed, a nervous chuckle escaping his lips. "Look, I think there might be a bit of a mix-up. It really wasn't anything special." "Please," Drenkel interjected, his 3 eyes fixated on Joe with genuine awe, "impart your wisdom. Share your secrets." Joe blinked, looking around the bar for a potential escape route. "Share what, exactly?" "The technique of the Earth Punch," Drenkel declared, as if the term was universally recognized. "My people, we desperately require this strength. Instruct me in the ways of your combat." Joe opened his mouth to explain that there was no such technique, that the entire incident was a bizarre stroke of luck. But the patrons of the Rusty Meteor were watching with knowing grins, and Mabel was already pouring Drenkel a drink. "Let him have his moment, Joe," she whispered with a wink. "You're a hero. Enjoy it." Joe sighed and reluctantly agreed, demonstrating a few generic punches and offering vague advice about keeping one's guard up. Drenkel listened with rapt attention, meticulously noting every word as if it were ancient wisdom. But Drenkel's visit was only the beginning. Within days, a steady stream of alien visitors began arriving, hailing from all corners of the galaxy. Some came as admirers, others as hopeful students eager to learn Joe's supposed fighting style, and a few simply out of curiosity. A small, lizard-like alien named Krell even approached Joe with a notebook, meticulously documenting Joe's training regimen. Joe attempted to explain that it was mostly a matter of chance and quick thinking, but Krell was insistent, meticulously recording Joe's evasive maneuvers as the dodge of wisdom and his light jabs as the gentle strike. Randy found the entire affair utterly hilarious. "I told you, Joe," he laughed, "you're going to become some kind of intergalactic folk hero. The Earth Puncher, or something equally ridiculous." Joe tried to laugh it off, but the constant attention was starting to wear him thin. The adulation was flattering, but he never desired the spotlight. He was just Joe, the barkeep who occasionally threw a punch when necessary. But the galaxy had a different narrative in mind. One afternoon, a messenger arrived with an official-looking scroll bearing the insignia of the Zorag Dominion. The message was brief and to the point. The Supreme Council of Zorag requested the presence of Joe Malone, champion of Earth, at a ceremony in his honor. Joe groaned, showing the scroll to Mabel. "A ceremony? Are they going to throw me a parade?" Mabel shrugged. "Sounds like they're extending an olive branch. You did knock out their top warrior, after all." Reluctantly, Joe agreed, figuring it was wiser to accept the invitation than to risk antagonizing an entire alien empire. A week later, he found himself on Zorag's home planet, standing on a massive platform before a crowd of thousands of cheering aliens chanting his name. Zorag, fully recovered and sporting what appeared to be a bruised ego, approached the podium. He glared at Joe, but there was a hint of grudging respect in his 6 eyes. "It seems our traditions have been upheld in a most unexpected manner," Zorag announced, his voice echoing across the arena. "Joe Malone has demonstrated that even the most unassuming of warriors can possess remarkable strength." Joe suppressed a chuckle at the unassuming warrior comment, opting instead to smile and nod as the crowd roared its approval. Zorag continued, "In recognition of this unprecedented victory, we bestow upon you the title of Honorary Warlord and a lifetime supply of Zoran battle juice." Joe blinked, staring at the enormous keg 2 Zorag soldiers rolled onto the platform. Thanks. I'll try to make it last," he muttered, wondering what in the world he'd do with an alien beverage. But the spectacle wasn't over. Just as Joe thought the ceremony was concluding, Zorag raised a hand for silence. "Now, as is our custom, we shall witness the sacred art of the Earth Punch. Show us, Joe Malone, how you achieved victory in honorable combat." Joe froze, thousands of eyes fixed on him, awaiting a demonstration of his legendary technique. He glanced at Zorag, who was still scowling, then at the expectant crowd. All right, Joe sighed, rolling his shoulders and raising his fists. He took a few dramatic steps forward, wound up, and then delivered the weakest, most perfunctory punch imaginable, a gentle tap into the air. The crowd gasped, a collective murmur of "vloo" and "arv" rippling through the arena as if they had just witnessed a sacred ritual. Joe caught Zorag's bewildered expression and fought back a grin. Zorag cleared his throat, nodding slowly. "A move of pure efficiency," he declared, though his voice betrayed a hint of confusion. With the ceremony finally concluded, Joe returned to Telia to find his legendary status further amplified. Alien tourists flocked to the colony, eager to visit the site of the duel. Some enterprising colonists had even set up a souvenir stand selling replica gloves and Earth Punch mugs. Mabel, embracing her role as Joe's self-proclaimed publicist, offered guided tours, regaling visitors with embellished tales of Joe's rigorous training and mastery of the ancient art of earth boxing. Joe found it all both amusing and absurd, but deep down, a sense of pride began to take root. He had become a symbol, a testament to the idea that anyone, even the most unlikely candidate, can rise to the occasion. One evening, as Joe sat at the bar watching the eclectic mix of patrons, Randy slid him a drink. "How does it feel to be a legend, champ?" he chuckled. Joe took a sip, shaking his head. "Honestly, it feels mostly like I got lucky." Randy grinned. "Maybe so. But it's not every day someone gets lucky enough to knock out a galactic warlord. Face it, Joe, you're one of a kind." Joe shrugged, looking around the bustling bar at the laughter and camaraderie between humans and aliens. "Guess there are worse things to be known for," he admitted, raising his glass. Hero or not, he was just Joe Malone, a retired boxer who had, in more ways than one, punched well above his weight. And as far as he was concerned, that was more than enough.